I am Vactor, and this is the Vactor-Verse. Comic book nerds assemble. My guests today are the comic book keepers, Chris and Lance, two nerd friends who love to talk comics. If you don't know, the Comic Book Keepers is a podcast where each episode they discuss one superhero character, villain, team, or ensemble from comic books, comic history, and their impact on our society. Boys, I would very much like to welcome you to the Vactor-Verse. Lance and Chris, how are you both doing today?
Doing pretty good, Vactor. Thanks for having us on. Feel so invited with that intro.
Oh, go ahead. I want to make every guest feel welcome here in the Vactor-Verse because this is a welcoming comic space for all those who dwell here. I'm going to have a link down in the show notes for all of the Comic Book Keepers links in their link tree, so you can go over there, subscribe. This is, before we even get into the podcast, I got to tell you guys, this is one of my favorite comic book podcasts on the internet, and I'm so happy that you are here to join me today. So this episode, we're going to get your comic book origin story, and we're going to get the Comic Book Keepers origin story. So we're going to get some behind the scenes of your podcast. So now I want to start with Chris only because his name begins first alphabetically. That's the only reason.
Right.
So
that's fair.
Chris, what is your comic book origin story? How did you get into this crazy medium?
Yeah, I am pretty old and older than Lance. So I started reading comic strips originally. Like remember those book fairs where you order like a Garfield book?
Yes.
Those long ones. And I got into
I love those.
Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes. And I just started collecting comic strip books, comic strip collections. And that sort of naturally led into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Archie books.
Ooh,
because they were very cartoony. And I was like, oh, I like Ninja Turtles. I like the cartoon. Here's a comic book of it. And I got into that. And then that was part of it. I started collecting these Ninja Turtle books. And the other part of it that really kickstarted it, that I was like, oh, there's so much more, is I had known about, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, all that stuff from various little things, cartoons, whatever, but never really got into the comics. And one year, randomly, my parents got me from the Sears catalog back when we had like physical catalogs.
Oh, wow.
They used to have like, here's a long box of comics, like 100 comics. And they got me the Marvel long box of just 100 random comics. And there are some really interesting finds in that. And I just remember going through that and I was like, what's X-Men? What's Fantastic? Quasar, all these random things. I got a first appearance of Gambit from that. I didn't know it at the time, but I just like all these different things. And that really was just like, there's so many cool things. And I found a couple of comics like Jim Lee X-Men that I was like, this is amazing. And that kind of got me into just, this is the medium that I want to involve myself in, work in, talk about everything.
Oh man, thank you, Scholastic, for getting so many of us hooked on the book fairs. Yeah. Man, I used to love those book fairs. That used to be the highlight of my week or month whenever the little checklist came out of what you want to order. Man, I used to love that. All right, Lance, let's get your comic book origin story. How did you get into these funny books?
So it wasn't until after the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie that my parents were like, oh, he likes comic book related things. So they went to a local comic book shop, walked in, and basically were just like, our kid likes Spider-Man now. What should we get him? And whoever worked at this place proceeded to hand them the most random pile of Spider-Man books I have ever seen. It was like Web of, you had some Spectacular, you had like a few Amazing mixed in there, but there was one I remember the most, which was Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man issue number 6, which has an epic Hobgoblin cover. And I just remember staring at that thing for way too much time just because I was blown away by the art from it. And it was darker. It was a lot darker than I expected a Spider-Man comic to be. And so that's kind of where just reading comics came to be. But I didn't continue collecting until like a jump into college, when one of my roommates was really into comics and he had all these trade paperbacks. And he was like, "Hey, I know you like all the superhero movies. Do you read many of the comics?" And I was like, "No, I just kind of I watched a ton of the animated series growing up. I watched all of the live action movies coming out. I was obsessed with Iron Man at that point with Robert Downey Jr." And he handed me a book. He's like, "No, read this and then let me know what you think about reading more comics." And he handed me Old Man Logan.
Ooh.
And I didn't look back from there. I have been collecting single issues and trades and hardcovers ever since.
Nice. That is fantastic. Oh, wait, man, I love hearing people's comic book origin stories, what got them in, and whether it's animated show, live action movie, toy, whatever it is. I'm always interested. So that's great. Old Man Logan, man, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, all of that stuff is right up my alley. And it's interesting, from the guests that I've had so far, it's been a high majority of Marvel versus DC. I wonder if that's just the age we've grown up in, with the MCU and a lot of popularity of Marvel. I wonder if that DC's just kind of taken a back seat these last couple decades. That'll be interesting for me to look into further. But I actually wanted to ask you guys both, what is your favorite? So every episode on the Comic Book Keepers, you do a different spotlight on a character, villain, whatever. Do you each have your own favorite characters in comic books? Chris, let's start with you.
Ooh, it's tough to choose from your children. I have a lot of favorites, and for different reasons. I mean, that's the easy answer, but I'm always partial to Rogue from the X-Men. I think just being from the South and having that sort of tragic, like she can't touch anyone, but she has all this angst, and it just, I think, resonated with me, coming from hey, you're a big nerd and you can't, no one understands you and you can't get close to people and stuff like that. So that was one. I really got into Hellboy. When I discovered Hellboy, I just find the art amazing, Mignola, and I just like his style and attitude and design. One of the best designed characters, I think, just with the big asymmetrical right hand of Doom. Yeah, those are probably two of my favorites, I guess.
Oh man, that is fantastic. Lance, who's your favorite character of all time?
Oh, this question's so difficult. For a really long time, I was obsessed with Venom. I still have I have a ton of Venom issues. I have a bunch of the trade paperbacks for him, like the earlier stuff. And I feel like it's a character that's only gotten better with time, especially after Donny Cates' run through Absolute Carnage. His Venom run, King in Black, was all phenomenal. It took Eddie to places that a Venom character has not gone before. I'll say Eddie Brock version of Venom, just because Flash Thompson, Agent Venom, is also I'm a huge fan of that character. Flash Thompson is probably one of my favorite characters in comics, just because of his arc that he's taken, the fact that he was such a fan of Spider-Man to the point where he wanted to become a hero and served in the military, lost his legs, and then had the opportunity to become a hero once again in a different way. And then kind of like on the other side of things, if we jump over to DC, I love Raven. I think Raven is one of the coolest characters. I love Teen Titans. I recently picked up her first appearance, which is also a first appearance of a couple other Teen Titans. And her backstory is just heartbreaking, and she just makes for very good writing.
Oh yeah, man, dang. All of these characters are so rich and they have so much depth to them. And that's one of the things that, I love about just the storytelling genre of comic books, how they have these rich characters and the writers that come along and tell these great stories. So yeah, those are great, fantastic picks. I'm a Spider-Man guy myself. I've been huge. Everything that I related to in comic books was kind of through the lens of Spider-Man. So it was like the 6 degrees of Spider-Man. Okay, Venom. All right, I know he was Spider-Man's villain and he was this. Okay, Daredevil, that was Spider-Man's friend. He was this. So every single character when I was growing up, I was like, how does that relate to Spider-Man? So that's always been my North Star in comics. And as we've gotten, just further animated series and movies and things like that, it's just kind of continued to define the wall crawler. We're getting some fantastic stuff now. Across the Spider-Verse,
I think he's a good character to interact with a lot of, that's why there's so many crossovers with Spider-Man.
Yes.
He guest stars, not just like as a marketing stunt, but like he gets along with and quips and has so many like relationships with various people, even in other universes. Like Invincible had a little Spider-Man crossover, and that was amazing. So we're big fans of Spider-Man too.
Just be careful reading his original first few appearances, because wow, was Peter Parker a jerk in the beginning.
Oh yeah. Early Spider-Man, not cool.
Not likable.
Yeah.
Too many wheat cakes, I think. That was a little. I think Stan Lee also kind of might be to blame for that. But I'm a huge fan of where the character has evolved into, and how every writer has come along and put their own stamp on it. So that is fantastic. Man, Lance, I was thinking about that Spider-Man and Hobgoblin cover. That was just that Todd McFarlane's art in general kind of has a defining period for me. I was reading his stuff in trade a little bit after he had left the book. So a lot of the collected stuff I was reading it, especially that Venom arc, and just in my mind, like those are core memories that I have for comic books, is just Todd McFarlane's art. So yeah, that is fantastic. I want to get a little bit more about the Comic Book Keepers. Like I said, this is one of my favorite comic book podcasts on the internet, and I love the way that you guys tackle specific characters, kind of go through their history and background. How did that start? How did the idea for the Comic Book Keepers start?
Do you want me to take this?
Yeah, sure.
Well, Lance and I both met through a mutual friend who invited us to play Dungeons and Dragons. Ooh. And I just kept noticing Lance had all these cool comic book shirts, and I was like, oh, that's a cool Venom shirt. Oh, that's a pretty cool Spider, and I was like, hey, yeah. And then basically the pandemic hit, and we had an online session of D&D, I think it was. And then at one point, Lance and I were just kind of like, talking about comic stuff or comic adaptations that were coming out. And I was like, oh yeah, we should start a podcast, or somebody said that. Right. And then one of the other guys in the group was like, yeah, you should. And we just kind of thought about that for a bit. And then, privately we kind of exchanged texts like, hey, are you thinking like maybe we'll just try it, let's try it out. And we had plenty of free time. We had lots of free time. Right. Plenty of time to read. And we were just like, let's just do this for, just see what we like. I have been working on an actual play podcast already, so I had some podcasting experience, and so it was important to me. I was like, if we do this, let's make sure that we get a big buffer and really, build up some good quality. And we asked our friend to compose a theme for us and everything. So we wanted it to be like really good out of the gate and have a lot of good content like lined up. So I think from that aspect, it was a great strong start. We hit the ground running.
Nice. And it really served as kind of a mental health help as well, just because I finished grad school, passed my board exam to start working, and a month later the pandemic hit. So there were no jobs because no one was hiring. So going from working so hard for so many years to finally be able to provide for my wife and start to kind of develop our lives together just got put on pause. So in order to fill time, like it was a lot of fun to get lost in the world of comics that give you all these varying emotions and just let you see heroes and just have just a lot of fun. So it definitely served that purpose for me. Rather than going to therapy, we just started a podcast.
Yeah. Dang, that's amazing. That's actually a good podcast title. And instead of going to therapy, I started a podcast. That's great. I'm like I said, I'm just a huge fan of what you guys are doing. Both of you guys have such great radio voices. Now that I'm seeing your faces, you got great faces too. But the voices are fantastic, and I love all of the discussions that you guys are having on the Comic Book Keepers. Do you have? I know the most recent episode, you guys are, or you were talking with Mike from Multiverse of Badness podcast. Do you have any things coming up down the pipe on Comic Book Keepers that you guys are excited about?
Yeah, we are.
Can you share?
Yeah. Our next episode that will be dropping this upcoming week. So I don't know if this episode will be out before then. Will be an episode about Grendel from Dark Horse. So we wanted to go to another indie character, which we're really excited about. I actually found his first omnibus today at my favorite used bookstore. So I'm very excited to dive into that. But yeah, we're getting pretty close to our 100th episode. We're like around 15 episodes away from that. And we know that we want to cover like a big character for that one.
Ooh.
Yeah,
nice
we might put out the feelers and see what the community want us to cover, because I think we've purposefully stayed. We've done some big characters. We did Spider-Man, we did Joker, kind of early on, TMNT. We've done some, big key characters, but then we were like, let's hold off on doing like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, because that, like, we were like, Batman's gonna be the last episode we do.
I am terrified of covering Batman. There's too much to cover. We would need an entire season of Comic Book Keepers to cover Batman.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a 4-part event or something. Man. But I think we talked about maybe doing Nick Fury because Secret Invasion is coming out.
Yeah.
Which version of Nick Fury? I'm not sure, but and possibly
the David
Shazam,
Hasselhoff
Captain
version.
Marvel. Yeah, the David Hasselhoff version. Stop right there. I'm an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We'll probably cover a Guardian of some kind, or maybe the group with the new movie coming out. And when Spider-Verse 2 comes out, I'm looking forward to delving into some of those Spider alternate versions.
Yes.
Yeah. That's something we could say is we will be covering multiple Spider people leading up to Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
Oh man, that just made my Peter tingle. Man, that is fantastic. I can't wait to see what you guys do with the Spider-Verse, the Spider people. Have you guys been reading the current Amazing Spider-Man that's been going on, the dark web and all that?
I haven't read it, but I recently listened to a friend's podcast where they covered it, and it was a really good job. I think it was Nick from over at None of My Friends Like Comics. Yes. I think they just recently covered that, and it's a great listen for anyone out there. Go check it out, because here's the thing. I wanted to bring up Ben Reilly earlier when it's like, who are your favorite characters? But I just keep getting so like demoralized with how he's treated in comics. Yeah, it is heartbreaking to be a Ben Reilly fan, and knowing what they were going to do in Dark Web with him. I couldn't read it, but I could listen about it.
Okay, yeah, you probably better off that way. That's not a great story for Ben Reilly. Man, I wish the Amazing book actually would get a little bit more consistent, because they've kind of been jumping around with writers and artists, and the storylines have been kind of weaving in and out. But I'm jonesing for that, that one long, continuous, good run by a writer. Get Chip Zdarsky back on there. Get somebody that can have a good long run. Is there anything? Now, I didn't prep you guys before this, so this is going to be straight off the top. Anything that you guys right now, as of March 2023, you guys are super enjoying in comics right now? Whether it's Marvel, DC, indie, what's something that you guys are really enjoying right now that you want to tell everybody about? Lance, I'll start with you because I always start with Chris because of his name. So I'll start with Lance on this one.
Yeah. So there are two books that are currently coming out that I am super excited every single time a new issue drops. Yes. The first one is currently they just released the third issue of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Series 2 crossover.
Yes.
I absolutely fell in love with this crossover. Ryan Parrott has a fantastic voice for both teams. We now have Dan Mora jumping in to do the art in this second series, which has been phenomenal. And they are going really weird with it in the best way possible. We're getting some mutant rangers in this one. It's really exciting. Dan Mora just jumped onto the series, which has been phenomenal. We've gotten to see him have a lot of fun with the different character designs. We're getting some mutant rangers this time around on top of having some ranger turtles. That it is, if you are a fan of Power Rangers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, this is a fantastic book. If you are a fan of both, it is an absolute dream come true. I love it so much. And I would say the other book that I love is the current ongoing Static series by Nicholas Draper Ivey and Vida Ayala. That their work together is phenomenal. Static has such a phenomenal voice with them, and Shadows of Dakota just dropped, so it's the second season of Static, and I'm so excited. I just picked up the issue today, so I'll be diving into that probably as soon as we finish recording, because it's so good. Static is so good.
Man, I've heard tons of great things. I just haven't had the time to jump in, so I think I'm going to move that up on my list. Some fantastic picks there, Lance. Chris, what are you digging right now? What is jumping off the page to you?
Yeah, so I don't live in the present. I constantly live in the past, and I'm terrible at like current stuff that's happening right now. I'm always like 5 years behind. So I'm currently making my way through the Hickman run of Powers of X, House of X, Dawn of X, like all of the cool like Krakoa things. And because I was like, okay, I gotta wait for like all this to come out, and then I've just been reading my way through it. And it's very heavy and intense, and there's a lot of little sub notes, and I'm looking at everyone and looking at all the charts and the Venn diagrams and stuff, and it's amazing. Like it's just completely changed the X-Men sort of landscape of what they're doing and all the villains that are working with the heroes and stuff. So that really has occupied all of my free time, is just kind of looking at that, other than the research that we do for individual characters and stuff. I will say I have enjoyed the Image book Dark Sun. That's probably my favorite new book that came out. That I just kind of find it really engaging and fun, and like it's just a different kind of superhero book. But yeah, mostly just making my way through recent X-Men stuff.
Okay, man, I actually was just like you, Chris, where I had a period where I just kind of I got snapped away from comics for a little bit. My other life duties called me away, but when I came back, the Powers of X, I always get it confused. Dawn of 10, Powers of X, that Hickman run, like everybody was talking about it. And I've always been one where I'm trying to jump back into X-Men. It's always like, all right, I'm like, I feel like I'm doing double dutch. Like, when do I jump in on X-Men? Because it's so like, there's so much stuff. So when somebody comes along like Grant Morrison, like Joss Whedon, like these huge X-Men touchstones, that's when I kind of jump in. So with this Hickman one, I binged it like you, and it was like, oh man, I wish I was kind of reading this at the time, but I just loved it. now I'm kind of getting back to that point where I'm like, I don't know what's going on in X-Men anymore. Call me when somebody big comes on again, and I'll get back in.
It's very much to me like picking your favorite players in like Super Smash Brothers or like where it's like I have my favorites and I'm like every once in a while I'm like, okay, where are these characters? You know, like what are they doing? What book are they in right now? And we just did a Shadowcat episode, and you know, finding out that she couldn't go to the island because of something, and now she's basically taking a ship and she's the Red Queen in the Hellfire Club. From Emma Frost, and she's like, hey, you take the ship and you go rescue mutants that can't be transported to the island. And so it was just kind of interesting to be like, wow, that's, you know, what's happening with her. And it's pretty cool. Just getting back into all those characters and seeing the dynamic that has changed.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what is going on in the X universe. You could have a whole podcast on that, which people do. They have just X-Men podcasts, but I'm like you guys. I want to jump in on everything. I want to read everything that's out there. So I'm 100% glad that you two were able to join me today, Chris and Lance. A huge shout out to both of you for appearing here, joining me in the Vactor-Verse. I want everyone out there who is listening or watching this, I want you to check out the Comic Book Keepers. They're doing some fantastic stuff over there. I'll leave, like I said, the link tree in the show notes and everything else. Chris and Lance, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to shout out and let people know about?
The Do a Powerbomb trade paperback recently came out by Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer. Everyone go buy it. It is phenomenal. The story is incredible. I champion everything Daniel Warren Johnson does because he is an awesome dude. But I also have ulterior motives for that because I also want a hardcover of that run. So I already picked up the trade paperback. Everyone go buy it so we get a hardcover because I need it.
100%.
I'll be a little bit more selfish, and one of my other side hustles is I draw fantasy characters for D&D and Pathfinder and stuff like that. So you can find me under the name Dungeon Heads on TikTok and Patreon and things like that. And I create a whole library of character art for people to use for their TTRPGs, and I'm an illustrator by trade. So that's kind of my other side hustle when I'm not reading comics.
Excellent. Yeah, everybody go support Chris on his side hustle and check everything out that they're doing. Like I said, both these guys are doing some fantastic work. They're putting out good stuff into the universe. So I want you all to reward them for all of their time and effort that they put in. Fantastic work from the Comic Book Keepers. Chris and Lance love comics, and you should too.